Hello, night seekers, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows, your quiet corner of the night, where whispers replace the noise of the world. Before you fall asleep tonight, these stories found you for a reason. Some stories wait in the dark for someone who needs them. Maybe tonight, that someone is you. Wherever you're listening from, I'm truly glad you're here. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? If these stories help you unwind, subscribe, so you always have a place to return to. Now, take a slow breath in and gently exhale. Close your eyes, and let's drift into the shadows. I was about 15 years old when this happened, and at the time, I didn't think much of it beyond being startled. It's only as I've gotten older that I've realized how unsettling the situation actually was, and how close it came to turning into something far worse. It was a normal evening when my sister asked me to babysit my nieces and nephews at her house. I had done it plenty of times before, so there was nothing unusual about it. I knew the routine, the house layout, and the neighborhood well. It was a quiet area, the kind of place where nothing ever really seemed to happen. That sense of normalcy is probably why my guard was so low that night. The kids were all pretty young. They had already eaten dinner, and we were settling into that calm part of the evening where everything slows down. The toys were scattered across the living room floor. A cartoon was playing softly on the television, and the house lights were dim but not dark. Outside, it was fully night. The windows reflected the inside of the house like mirrors, and from where I was sitting, I couldn't see much of the yard beyond vague shapes and shadows. At some point, my niece, who was still very little, looked up at me with a serious expression on her face and said something that immediately caught my attention. She said, "That man keeps watching me." I remember feeling a brief flicker of unease, but it didn't fully register yet. Kids say strange things all the time. They exaggerate, imagine things, misunderstand shadows or reflections. My first instinct was that she was either joking or had seen something on TV that stuck in her mind. I asked her what she meant. She just repeated it, pointing vaguely toward the window. I stood up and looked around the room, then walked over to the windows and glanced outside. I didn't see anyone. The yard looked empty. The street was quiet. No movement, no figures, nothing that stood out. So I brushed it off. I told her everything was fine and that she was probably just tired. She didn't argue with me, but she didn't look convinced either. She went back to playing, though she stayed closer to me after that. Not long after, my phone rang. It was my dad. The moment I answered, I could hear panic in his voice. He asked me, very urgently, if I was okay. The way he said it immediately made my stomach drop. I told him yes, I was fine, and asked him why he was asking. That's when he told me what had happened. Where the neighbors had called the police because there was a peeping Tom looking into one of the houses on the block. They had seen a man standing outside, looking through windows. When the police got involved and started calling around to check on everyone, my dad was notified and immediately thought of me babysitting alone with the kids. Hearing that sent a jolt of fear through me. Almost immediately after that phone call ended, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but in that moment, every knock sounded threatening. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 police officers standing outside. I opened the door, trying to stay calm. They explained why they were there and asked if everyone inside was okay. I told them we were, and that I hadn't noticed anything unusual. They asked if I had seen or heard anyone outside the house earlier. That's when my mind snapped back to what my niece had said. "That man keeps watching me." I told the officers about it, explaining that one of the kids had mentioned someone watching. but that I hadn't seen anyone when I checked. They took it seriously, which surprised me. They didn't brush it off as a kid's imagination. They asked more questions, making sure all the doors and windows were locked, and that everyone inside was safe. While they were there, they told me the rest of the story. Earlier that night, a woman had been walking home from a nearby bar. A man who was extremely drunk started following her. She noticed him behind her and got scared. So when she reached her house, she ran inside and locked the door behind her. She thought she was safe. But when she looked out her window, she saw the man standing outside, looking into a different house. That house was my sister's house, where I was babysitting. Because he was so intoxicated, he apparently thought that was the house she had run into. He was standing outside, peering through the windows, trying to see inside, not realizing he was at the wrong place entirely. That's when she called the police. The officers told me they had caught him not far from the house. He was still drunk and confused, and they had no trouble identifying him as the same man she had described. He was taken into custody and likely spent the night in jail for multiple charges, including public intoxication, attempted forced entry, and spying. As they explained all of this, my heart was pounding. I looked over at my niece, who was sitting quietly on the couch, clutching a stuffed animal. She wasn't crying. She wasn't acting scared anymore. She was just watching everything unfold with the calm seriousness she'd had earlier. That was when it hit me. She wasn't imagining anything. She had been right. There really had been a man outside, watching through the windows, and she had noticed him before any of the adults did. The thought made my skin crawl. I kept imagining how close he must have been to the glass, how long he might have been standing there, and how easily things could have gone differently if the neighbor hadn't seen him first. After the police left, I double-checked every lock in the house. I closed curtains and blinds that had been left open. I sat with the kids in the living room until my sister came home, unable to fully relax. Every shadow outside felt suspicious. Every sound made me tense. Nothing else happened that night. The kids were fine, I was fine. The woman who had been followed was safe. In the end, no one was physically hurt, but the situation stayed with me in a way I didn't expect. What bothers me most when I think about it now is how easily I could have ignored it completely. If my dad hadn't called, if the neighbor hadn't been observant, if the police hadn't taken it seriously, that man could have stayed outside longer. He could have tried to get inside, and I was just a teenager alone with several small kids. I also think about my niece. Kids get dismissed so easily when they say things like that. That man keeps watching me sounds like imagination, until you realize it wasn't. She noticed something was wrong and said it out loud, and it turned out to be true. That night taught me a lesson I've never forgotten. Sometimes the scariest situations don't involve ghosts or the supernatural. Sometimes it's just a real person in the wrong state of mind, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. And sometimes the warning comes from the last person you'd expect. Ever since then, I listen when kids say something feels wrong, because sometimes they see what the rest of us miss. When my grandmother died, I was very young. I don't remember my exact age, only that I was still a little kid and completely unprepared for what death really meant. Loss wasn't something I understood yet. I knew people could be sad. I knew crying meant something bad had happened. But I didn't have the emotional tools to understand why or how permanent it was. The day we found out, everything felt confusing and loud. My grandmother's husband at the time, who was not my biological grandfather, called the house. I remember the phone ringing and adults rushing around. When he spoke, He was screaming and crying so hard that his words barely made sense. He kept saying that she was gone, that she was dead. My brother and I were nearby, watching all of this unfold without really knowing what was happening. Everyone was crying, so we started crying too. That's the strangest part of being a kid in moments like that. You mirror the emotions around you without understanding them. We cried because the adults cried. We felt scared because something felt wrong, not because we understood death. I remember feeling overwhelmed, like the house had suddenly become too small and too heavy. There's something important to explain about my grandparents. The man who called us that day was my grandmother's husband at the time, but not my real grandfather. My real grandfather was her first husband. I had only met him once in my entire life, and even then, I was too young to form any real memory of him. To this day, I couldn't tell you what he looked like. I don't have a mental image of his face. No photos stuck with me. No clear memories. And that's why what happened next has always terrified me. That night, I was in my mother's bedroom. She was lying in bed, exhausted and emotionally drained. She told me I could lie there with her if I was sad. I was sad, even though I didn't fully understand why. The house felt different that night. Quieter, heavier, like something had shifted. As the night went on, the room felt colder. Not just physically, but in a way that made my skin prickle. I climbed into bed with my mother and lay there beside her, facing the wall. A lamp was on, casting a dim, warm light across the room. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't bright either. Everything felt muted. We were both quiet, just lying there. Then something happened that I still can't explain. On the wall in front of us, it was like something began to play, almost like an old movie projector. At first, it was just light shifting in a strange way. Then a shape formed. Slowly, clearly enough to understand what I was seeing, a man appeared on the wall. He was blurry and out of focus, but distinct enough to recognize as a person. He was wearing red and white striped pajamas. I watched as this man walked across the wall, as if the wall itself was a screen. He moved calmly, not rushed. He walked over to where a chair would be if the wall were real space. And then he sat down. After sitting there for just a moment, he disappeared. The room went still again. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My entire body felt stiff, frozen, like fear had locked me in place. I remember my skin feeling cold, even though I was under the blankets. My heart was racing, but I couldn't speak. My mother sat up suddenly. She stared at the empty space where the man had been. Her face went pale. She didn't question what she had seen. She didn't ask me if I saw it, too. She simply said, in a quiet but shaken voice, that it was her father. She said he was here looking for my grandmother. That sentence alone was enough to completely break me. I had never seen my real grandfather before. I didn't know what he looked like. Yet my mother was certain. She didn't hesitate. She didn't sound unsure. She knew who it was. And that certainty made it far more terrifying than if she had brushed it off. I lay there, unable to move, unable to cry, unable to speak. My body felt cold and rigid, like I was being held in place by fear itself. Eventually, I don't remember what happened. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember leaving the room. The memory just stops. A few nights later, something else happened. This time I was in the living room. I was on the couch, and I was home alone. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel amplified. From where I was sitting, I had a clear view down the hallway that led to my parents' bedroom. I don't remember why I was home alone. I only remember the feeling. That same cold, paralyzing fear came over me again, suddenly and without warning. It was exactly the same feeling I had felt the night my grandmother died. My body went stiff. My chest felt tight. My skin felt icy. I didn't want to look down the hallway, but I did. It felt like something was turning my head for me, like my body was no longer listening to my thoughts. Slowly, my gaze shifted towards the end of the hall. That's when I saw him. Standing at the end of the hallway was a man. This time, he was crystal clear. He was wearing a business suit that looked like it was from the 1930s or 1940s. He had a fedora-style hat on his head and a cane in front of him, both hands resting on it. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring directly at me. I couldn't see his eyes clearly. His face was slightly out of focus, like it didn't fully belong in the space. But his posture was solid, real, unmistakable. Then something changed. His mouth stood out more than anything else. It looked like a black slit on his face. Slowly, impossibly, it began to grow. It stretched wider and wider until it covered his entire head. The blackness spread, swallowing his face, and then the entire end of the hallway turned black. The air felt colder than I've ever felt in my life. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't look away. I don't know how long it lasted. Time didn't feel real in that moment, and then, just like the other time, my memory cuts out. The next thing I remember is waking up in my bed. It felt like only minutes had passed. No one mentioned anything. No one asked me if I was okay. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen. I didn't have the words to explain it, and even if I did, I don't think I would have been believed. Now, as an adult, I don't know what to think. 5-year-old me is still terrified of this story. I don't know if it was a dream. I don't know if it was grief mixed with fear and imagination. I don't know if it was something real that I experienced in a way my child mind couldn't fully process. All I know is that the fear was real. The cold was real. The paralysis was real. Antra and I have never wanted to go back to that house. Even now, years later, I can't drive past it without feeling that same cold creep into my body. My chest tightens, my skin prickles, and I feel like I'm being watched. Some places hold memories. Some hold something else entirely. And whatever was in that house, I don't ever want to meet it again. This is one of those things that used to scare me badly when I was younger. And even now, years later, it still gives me an uncomfortable feeling when I think about it. I don't believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural. I've never been religious, never believed in God, and I've always tried to explain things logically. Still, some memories don't sit quietly in your head, no matter how rational you try to be. We lived in an old cottage that had been built around 1890. It was the kind of house that had clearly lived many lives before us. Thick walls, uneven floors, odd corners, and rooms that never quite lined up the way modern houses do. Because of its age, the house always made noise. Creaks, pops, groans, especially at night when everything else was quiet. That was just normal to us. You grow up in an old house, and you learn to tune those sounds out. In 1995, my parents decided to renovate the place. It wasn't a cosmetic renovation either. It was structural. One of the biggest changes involved moving the staircase. The original staircase was in a strange little nook of the house, almost hidden away. It had its own small door, like a private passage. The steps were narrow and steep, and there were exactly 13 of them. I remember that number clearly because it always felt slightly ominous even before anything strange happened. As part of the renovation, the old staircase was completely removed. A new staircase was built in a different part of the house. This one was wider, brighter, more open, and only had 12 steps. The old staircase, with its little door, was dismantled entirely. The space where it had been was closed up, repurposed, and eventually forgotten, at least physically. But the sounds didn't forget. After the renovation, every now and then, usually late at night, we would hear footsteps. Not random creaking, not the settling of old wood, but distinct footsteps. 13 of them, one after the other, followed by the sound of a door closing. The old staircase door. That door no longer existed. At first I tried to convince myself it was just the house making familiar noises in unfamiliar ways. Renovations change how sound travels. Maybe the new staircase echoed differently. Maybe pipes or floorboards were shifting. That's what I told myself. But it was always the same pattern. 13 steps. Then the door. It wasn't every night, which somehow made it worse. If it had been constant, it might have faded into the background. Instead, it happened just often enough to keep it in my mind. I would lie in bed, counting without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 13. Then the soft but unmistakable sound of a door closing. I used to freeze when I heard it. I would hold my breath, listening, waiting to hear something else. Usually, there wasn't anything. Just silence afterward. But the fact that it sounded so deliberate, so specific, is what terrified me. It sounded like someone was still using a staircase that no longer existed. There's another memory from that house that's even harder to explain. One night, I woke up and noticed that my sister wasn't in her bed. We had bunk beds at the time, and she wasn't where she was supposed to be. I don't remember feeling scared at first, more confused than anything. I assumed she had gone into my parents' room after a bad dream, or something similar. I got out of bed and walked down the hallway toward my parents' bedroom. The house was dark, lit only by a faint glow from a lamp somewhere. Everything felt quiet and still, like the house was holding its breath. As I stepped through the doorway into my parents' bedroom, something strange happened. My mum and my sister were both sitting upright in my mum's bed. The moment they saw me, they both started screaming at me. Not screaming in fear for themselves, but screaming at me, telling me not to move, telling me to stop. Their voices were panicked, desperate, like something terrible was about to happen. I froze. I had no idea what was going on. I couldn't see anything unusual. I was just standing there, confused and frightened by their reaction. My mum's face was white, her eyes wide. My sister looked absolutely terrified. They were staring at something directly in front of me. Afterwards, once everyone had calmed down, my mum told me what she believed had happened. She swore to this day that it was true. According to her, as I walked into the room, I was about to walk straight through a green, ghostly figure. She said it was translucent, glowing faintly, and standing right in my path. I never saw it. Not even a hint of it. But the looks on their faces were enough to burn the moment into my memory. Whatever they thought they saw, they genuinely believed it was real. That fear wasn't acted. It was raw and immediate. And seeing my mum that scared shook me more than any supposed ghost ever could. Even now, I don't know what to think about that night. I don't believe I was about to walk through a ghost. I don't believe in spirits. But I also can't explain why both my mum and my sister reacted the way they did, at the exact same time, to something I couldn't see. That house had a way of making moments like that feel heavier than they should have been. There's one more thing that happened years later, long after we had moved on from that cottage. It wasn't scary in the same way, but it stuck with me just as deeply. My gran had died some years earlier. She and I had been very close. When I was little, she had set up a small bank account for me, something meant to help me later in life. Years passed, and the account was forgotten about. One day, completely by chance, I found paperwork related to it. I realized the account still existed. I decided to go to the bank and sort it out. It felt strange, dealing with something she had done for me so long ago, knowing she wasn't around anymore. I was sitting in the bank, filling out forms, signing my name over and over again. It was quiet inside, the usual low hum of voices and printers. As I was doing this, I started to hear music drifting in from outside. There was a busker on the street. He was playing The Girl from Ipanema. That song hit me like a wave. That had been my grand's song. Ours, really. We used to listen to Astrud Gilberto together all the time. That song, in particular, was our favorite. When my gran died, my aunt had given me the CD because she knew how much it meant to me. I hadn't heard that song in years. And there it was, playing while I was signing papers connected directly to my gran, in a moment that already felt emotionally charged. I remember just sitting there, pen in hand, feeling something tighten in my chest. It didn't feel scary. It felt sad, comforting, and strange all at once. I don't believe it was a sign. I don't believe my gran was sending me a message. But the timing was so precise that it's hard not to feel something when I think about it. Looking back on everything, I still don't believe in ghosts or spirits. I don't think our old cottage was haunted. I don't think there was a green figure in my parents' bedroom. I don't think my gran was reaching out through a busker's song. But those experiences still feel heavy. They still feel like moments where logic doesn't quite cover everything. And even though I don't believe in the supernatural, there are some memories that refuse to be neatly explained away. Some places, some moments, leave an imprint on you. And even if you don't believe in ghosts, that doesn't mean they can't still make you feel uneasy years later, when you least expect it. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. I lived in that apartment for about 2 years, and for most of that time, nothing strange ever happened. It was a 4-bedroom place, and over those 2.5 years, I had several different roommates come and go. People moved in, people moved out, friends crashed on the couch for weeks at a time. Through all of that, I never experienced anything that felt unusual or unsettling. I was the only one who lived there for the entire duration, so I knew the place well. I knew the normal sounds, the quirks of the building, the way the doors and windows behaved when it was windy. Everything felt familiar and safe. That changed during my last fall semester living there, right around the time a new roommate moved in. We all referred to her as the new girl, because she was the last person to join the apartment. And honestly, she was a bit different from the rest of us. I didn't think much of it at first. People are strange in their own ways, and college apartments are full of odd personalities. I never imagined that anything would change just because one more person had moved into the spare bedroom. Around mid-August, when the weather was still warm, but the days were getting shorter, I started getting into the Halloween spirit. I've always loved scary movies, especially around that time of year. I would host movie nights pretty regularly, inviting anywhere from 5 to 8 people over. We'd pile into the living room, turn off all the lights, make snacks, and watch horror movie after horror movie. It was something I'd been doing for years, even before living in that apartment. One night, during one of these movie marathons, something small but strange happened. We were sitting on the couches, fully invested in whatever movie was playing, when we noticed the apartment door slowly starting to open. It didn't swing wide open, just crept open a few inches. At first, I wasn't alarmed at all. Our neighbors were close friends, and would often walk in without knocking, like something straight out of Seinfeld. They usually didn't hesitate either. They'd just open the door and announce themselves. So I waited for someone to poke their head around the corner or call out a greeting. Nothing happened. After a moment, we paused the movie and got up to check. We looked into the hallway outside the apartment. It was empty. No footsteps, no voices, no sound of someone walking away. We shrugged it off and assumed it was a draft. Old buildings do weird things, and sometimes pressure changes can cause doors to move. We closed the door and went back to the movie. A few nights later, during another movie night, we decided to keep the door unlocked again, partly out of curiosity. We wanted to see if the same thing would happen. This time we were more alert, paying closer attention to the door than we probably should have been. And sure enough, it happened again. The door slowly opened on its own, just like before. This time we didn't just sit there. Myself, my roommate, my boyfriend, and one of our neighbors all jumped up at once. We rushed toward the door and split up, running up and down the stairs, checking both directions of the hallway. There was no one there. No sound of footsteps fading away. No doors closing. It was as if no one had ever been there at all, and that was the first time I felt uneasy. It wasn't full-on fear yet, but it planted a seed in my mind. The apartment had never done this before. Not once in the first 2 years I lived there. And now it was happening repeatedly. The night things truly crossed into something I couldn't explain was when we decided to watch Paranormal Activity 3. Before starting the movie, we were talking about the door again, joking about how weird it was and whether we should leave it unlocked. The lights were still on at this point, and everyone was in a casual mood, laughing it off. My boyfriend made an offhand comment that stuck with me. He said something along the lines of how he could easily explain the door opening as a draft or air pressure, but what would really creep him out would be if the door opened and then slammed shut on its own. True, it was one of those comments that everyone acknowledged with a nervous laugh. Someone said, "Yeah, that would be creepy," and then we moved on. We turned off all the lights, left the door unlocked, and started the movie. We weren't even halfway through when it happened. This time we didn't just see the door move. We heard the doorknob turn. Slowly. Deliberately. The door creaked open, just like it had before, but instead of stopping after a few inches, it opened about a quarter of the way. For a split second, everything felt suspended. And then the door suddenly slammed shut with incredible force. The sound was loud enough to make the entire apartment shake. We were on the middle floor, and it felt like the impact traveled through the walls. A dry erase board we had hanging nearby was knocked off the wall and crashed onto the floor. For a moment, no one moved. Half of us were frozen in place, staring at the door in shock. The others scrambled to turn on the lights. Once the lights were on, we rushed to the door again. We opened it, looked up and down the hallway, checked the stairs. Nothing. No one. No explanation. At that point, the atmosphere in the apartment completely changed. The joking stopped. The movie was turned off. People started talking over each other, trying to explain what had just happened. None of us could come up with a logical reason for the door to behave that way. It didn't feel like a draft. It felt intentional. Someone, half joking and half serious, said something along the lines of apologizing to whatever might be messing with us. It was one of those nervous, "if we offended you, we're sorry" kinds of comments. Everyone laughed awkwardly, but underneath that laughter was genuine fear. About a week later, something happened that still gives me chills. The new girl roommate, who had never been present during any of these incidents because she went home on the weekends, started acting very strangely. One afternoon, she began walking around the apartment speaking in tongues. She was muttering words that didn't make sense, repeating phrases none of us recognized. Then she started sprinkling holy water all over the apartment, going from room to room, saying she was blessing the place. None of us had told her anything about the door, not a word. We just stood there, watching her, exchanging confused and unsettled looks. No one knew what to say. The timing was too perfect, too unsettling to ignore. Even now, when I think back on it, I get goosebumps. That apartment had been completely normal for 2 years. It wasn't until that final semester, after she moved in, that everything changed. I still don't know what to make of it. I don't claim it was paranormal. I don't have an explanation at all, honestly. But I know what I experienced, and I know that apartment never felt the same after that night. Even years later, thinking about that door slamming shut in the dark still makes my stomach tighten. I have lived in the same room, in the same house, for my entire life. I'm 19 years old now, a Catholic, and currently studying biology. I'm someone who believes that some form of an afterlife exists, and that spirits may exist as well. That belief didn't come from one single dramatic moment. Instead, it came from a long chain of experiences that stretch back as far as my infancy. Stories my parents told me long before I was old enough to remember things clearly myself. According to my mother and father, I was a fairly normal baby in most ways. I cried like any infant would. I woke up in the middle of the night. I fussed. Nothing about that was unusual. What stood out to them, though, was how suddenly my mood would change. They would hear me crying loudly through the baby monitor and rush to my room, only to find me completely calm by the time they got there. Not just calm, either. I would be smiling, wide-eyed, content, as if nothing had been wrong at all. At first, they brushed it off. Babies do strange things. But it happened often enough that they started talking about it. They would joke about how I seemed to calm myself down faster than most kids. Looking back, my mother says there were moments when it felt like something else had soothed me before they arrived. But she never said that out loud at the time. By the time I was around 2 years old, I had started forming full sentences. That was when I said something that stuck with my mother forever. One night, after she came into my room because she thought she heard me crying, she asked if I was okay. Apparently, I looked at her and said, very casually, "Don't worry. The man in the rocking chair keeps me safe." There was a rocking chair in my room. It had belonged to my grandfather. Before he died, he sat in that chair every single day. It was his chair. He rocked in it while reading the newspaper, watching television, or just resting. After he passed away from a heart attack, the chair was moved into my room. No one ever explained to me who my grandfather was at that age, and no one ever told me stories about him sitting in that chair. Yet I referenced a man sitting there, protecting me. My mother says she felt a chill run through her when I said it, but she didn't react outwardly. She didn't want to scare me. She just nodded, reassured me, and left the room. She told my father later, and while both of them were unsettled, they convinced themselves it was just a child's imagination. As I grew older, there were other things that happened, not just to me, but to my family as well. My father, for example, has always complained about feeling like he's being watched or followed when he cuts the grass. Our yard isn't small, and mowing it takes a while. I've watched him from the porch or through the windows many times. He'll suddenly stop, look over his shoulder, or turn his head quickly, like he sensed movement just behind him. When I asked him about it, he'd shrug it off. He'd say it felt like someone was walking close behind him, matching his pace. Over the years, he's gotten more used to the feeling, but even now, I still catch him getting startled every once in a while. He never talks about it in a joking way. It clearly unsettles him, even if he doesn't like to admit it. When I was about 7 years old, I had an experience that terrified me and stuck with me vividly. Like many kids, I had trouble sleeping. One night, I was lying awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling. Across the room, on top of my dresser, sat a plastic Godzilla toy. It had a button on its chest. When pressed, the torso would rotate and the head would let out a loud roar. I hadn't touched it that night. Suddenly, in the complete darkness, the toy activated on its own. The roaring sound shattered the silence, and the head began to move. I remember my entire body locking up. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just stared at it, convinced something was horribly wrong. The sound eventually stopped, but I stayed frozen in fear until morning. Even now, thinking about that night makes my chest feel tight. There was no logical explanation, yet the toy required pressure on the button to activate. It wasn't old or broken. It never did that again, before or after that night. My father has his own stories as well. On several occasions, he has claimed to see a woman in a red dress walking down the hallway toward his bedroom. He never sees her clearly for long, just enough to recognize the shape, the color, the movement. When he looks again, she's gone. He doesn't talk about it much, but when he does, he's serious. He's not the type to exaggerate or joke about things like that. The most recent experience happened about a month ago, again in the same house. To understand it properly, it helps to know the layout of the second floor. It's small. There's a bathroom in the middle of the hallway. My sister's room is at one end, mine at the other. The staircase comes up about halfway between the two rooms. One night, I came home late from work, around 2 in the morning. The house was dark and quiet. Everyone was asleep. I walked inside, locked the door behind me, and started heading upstairs. As I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed someone coming down toward me. I didn't panic. I genuinely thought it was my sister. I stepped aside to give her room and even spoke, saying something casual, like asking why she was up so late. The figure kept moving. As it reached the spot directly in front of me, it simply vanished. It didn't fade slowly. It didn't walk past me. It was just gone. The hallway was empty. Even though it was pitch black, I know what I felt. I truly believed there had been a person in front of me. The sense of presence was overwhelming. I stood there for a long time afterward, heart pounding, trying to understand what had just happened. I eventually went to my room and locked the door. Living in this house for 19 years has shaped how I see the world. I don't jump to conclusions, and I don't claim to know exactly what any of these experiences mean. But taken together, they've made it impossible for me to believe that this world is all there is. Something lingers here. Something watches. Something remembers. And whether it's comforting or unsettling seems to depend on the moment. About 7 years ago, when I was 11 years old, something happened to me that I still carry with me every single day. At the time, I was living in England. I live in Australia now, and my life has changed in many ways, but that experience has never faded. It didn't disappear with time, distance, or growing older. It sits quietly in the back of my mind, shaping the way I move through the world, the way I look at people, and the way I understand fear. When people think of England, they often imagine busy cities, crowded streets, and endless traffic. But where I lived was nothing like that. It was deeply rural. The countryside stretched for miles, broken only by small towns scattered far apart. Many people lived outside of those towns entirely, in isolated houses surrounded by fields, hedges, and narrow roads. My friend lived in one of those places, far from the town center, and visiting him meant long walks along empty country roads. These roads were quiet in a way that felt normal to us back then. They could go on for miles without a single building in sight. No shops, no houses, no streetlights. Just open land, tall hedges, and the sound of wind moving through fields. Cars were rare. Sometimes you could walk for an hour and not see a single one. As kids, we didn't think anything of it. We had grown up that way. It felt safe, familiar, peaceful. On the day it happened, my friend and I were walking along one of those roads. It was an ordinary day. Nothing special about it at all. We were just two kids walking and talking, laughing about stupid things, kicking stones along the road. There was no reason to feel uneasy. We had walked that same road countless times before. Nothing bad had ever happened there. The road was empty, and the air was still. The only sounds were our footsteps and distant birds. Then we heard a car approaching from behind us. At first, that didn't alarm us. Cars did pass occasionally, just not very often. But something about this one felt wrong almost immediately. The car slowed down as it approached, then pulled over and stopped right next to us. We both stopped walking. My first thought was that the driver might be lost and needed directions. That happened sometimes in rural areas. But when I looked inside the car, the feeling in my chest changed instantly. In the back seat sat a woman. She was staring directly at us. Her face had no expression at all. No curiosity, no friendliness, no concern. Just a blank, empty stare. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Before either of us could say anything, the driver's door opened. A large man stepped out of the car. He was tall, broad, and intimidating in a way that immediately made my stomach drop. His presence alone felt threatening. His voice had a strong accent, and while I couldn't place it exactly at the time, it sounded Polish. He didn't hesitate. He shouted at us, "Get in the fucking car!" The way he said it wasn't rushed or panicked. It wasn't even angry at first. It was cold, controlled, like he fully expected us to obey, like this was something he had done before. For a moment, my mind completely shut down. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't even respond. I was frozen. My friend was frozen too. We were 11 years old, and our brains simply couldn't process what was happening fast enough to react. The man didn't wait for us to move. He lunged forward and grabbed both of us by the neck, one hand on each of us. His grip was crushing and painful. He tried to drag us toward the open car door. I remember how strong he was, how easily he moved us. We were tiny compared to him. Children. We started shouting, crying, telling him no, begging him to stop. It didn't matter. The more we resisted, the angrier he became. His face twisted with rage, and he started punching and kicking us. These weren't weak blows. These were full-force punches and kicks from a grown man. He wasn't holding back at all. We were taking direct hits, over and over. At first, the pain didn't even register properly. Shock drowned it out. I remember thinking, very clearly, that this couldn't be real. That this was something that happened in movies, or on the news, not to kids like us on a quiet country road. I remember looking at the woman in the back seat, hoping she would do something. Say something. Stop him. She didn't. She just watched. That realization was almost worse than the violence itself. The understanding that this wasn't some misunderstanding, that this was planned, that there were two adults involved and neither of them cared if we lived or died. I truly believed in that moment that we were going to die there, that no one would come, that no one would hear us. The road was too quiet, too empty. This was the kind of place where terrible things could happen without witnesses. Then, by pure chance, we heard another engine. A van was coming down the road. It wasn't close yet, but it was loud enough to be unmistakable. The man noticed it instantly. His entire behavior changed in a split second. He let go of us like we burned him. He didn't say another word. He jumped back into the car, slammed the door, and sped away. The woman never looked back. The van drove past moments later. It was full of tradies, men on their way to or from work. They slowed down slightly, probably noticing two kids on the side of the road, bruised, shaking, and crying. I don't remember clearly whether they stopped or not. Everything after that feels blurred. I just know we weren't taken. We were alive. Physically, we were incredibly lucky. We were hurt, bruised, sore, but nothing was broken. No hospital stay. No permanent physical damage. Mentally, something inside me shattered that day. Before that moment, the world felt predictable. After that, it felt dangerous, unstable. I learned at 11 years old that strangers aren't just something parents warn you about out of caution. Some of them genuinely want to hurt you. Some of them don't care how young you are or how helpless you look. From that day on, I was never the same. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. I started looking over my shoulder constantly. I noticed cars slowing down near me. I memorized license plates without even realizing I was doing it. Empty places made me nervous. Crowded places made me tense. Silence felt threatening. Even now, years later, those instincts haven't left me. Moving to Australia didn't erase it. Growing older didn't erase it. Time didn't erase it. The memory faded around the edges, but the fear it planted stayed rooted deep inside me. I don't know what would have happened if that van hadn't come along at exactly the right moment. I don't want to know. I just know that chance saved our lives that day. And because of that, I will never walk through the world the same way again. When I worked retail about 10 years ago, I was 18 years old and thought I understood the world well enough to move through it without much fear. I didn't feel invincible exactly, but I definitely felt careless in the way only teenagers can. Looking back now, I realize how thin the line was between what happened that day and something far worse. Even now, as I sit here thinking about it and putting it into words, I can feel the anxiety creeping back in, like my body remembers something my mind tries to push away. At the time, I was working at a retail store in a large shopping area. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave me some independence. One afternoon, my brother came to visit me while I was on my shift. He was close in age to me, and we were tight. But he asked if I wanted to take my break and go grab lunch at the taco cabana nearby. It wasn't far at all, and instead of driving, we decided to walk. The weather was decent, and we figured it would be nice to stretch our legs, have a smoke, and talk like we usually did. To get there on foot, we had to walk down an alley behind a large retail strip. It wasn't a place people really hung out. Mostly dumpsters, loading docks, cracked pavement, and the backs of stores. During the day, it was usually empty, except for delivery trucks, or employees taking smoke breaks. That day, though, as soon as we entered the alley, I felt something was off. There was a truck parked partway down the alley. It wasn't unusual to see vehicles back there, but what stood out immediately was the man sitting inside. He wasn't looking at his phone or minding his own business. He was staring at us, not casually glancing over, but fully watching us as we walked closer. His eyes followed us the entire time. I remember exchanging a quick look with my brother. We didn't say anything out loud, but we both noticed him. The guy looked older, rough around the edges, the kind of person who made you uncomfortable without doing anything overtly wrong. His truck was idling, and he didn't move as we passed. He just kept staring. Once we were past the truck, we relaxed a little. We joked about how creepy the guy was, brushing it off the way you do when you don't want to admit something unsettled you. Being teenagers, we were stupid and reckless. We saw some empty beer bottles lying around the alley, probably tossed there by someone else. And without really thinking about it, we picked a couple up and smashed them on the pavement. There was no real reason for it. We weren't angry or trying to make a statement. It was just pointless, destructive behavior, the kind you don't think twice about at that age. We were just about to exit the alley when everything went wrong. Out of nowhere, we heard an engine roar to life behind us. Before we could even fully turn around, the truck came flying toward us. It swerved hard and nearly ran my brother over. He had to jump out of the way to avoid getting hit. The truck screeched to a stop, blocking our path out of the alley completely. My heart started pounding instantly. The driver's door flew open, and the same creepy guy jumped out. This time he wasn't just staring. He was holding a gun in one hand and a cell phone in the other. But he was screaming at the top of his lungs, his face red, eyes wild. He kept yelling about how he had finally caught us fucking with this place, accusing us of vandalizing things, even though we'd never been there before in our lives. He was shouting into the phone, saying things like, "I found them and I've got them right here." He told us he was talking to a 911 dispatcher and that the dispatcher was instructing us to get into his truck so he could take us to the police station. The way he said it was aggressive, commanding, like he expected us to obey without question. For a moment, fear completely took over. There was a man with a gun standing in front of us, blocking our exit. My brain was racing. Was this real? Were we about to be arrested? Was this guy actually calling the police? Or was he lying? Everything felt surreal, like it couldn't possibly be happening. Then something clicked. I realized how wrong this was. Police don't tell civilians to kidnap suspects. Dispatchers don't instruct armed strangers to force people into vehicles. Nothing about the situation made sense. The guy was unhinged, yelling contradictory things, trying to intimidate us into compliance. I could tell my brother was thinking the same thing. We looked at each other, and without even saying much, we both knew we weren't getting into that truck. We told him we would wait right there for the police to arrive, but we were not getting into his vehicle. His expression changed instantly. The shouting turned into pure rage. He lunged forward and grabbed my brother, trying to physically drag him toward the truck. That was the moment everything escalated beyond fear into sheer survival. But my brother fought him off, shrugging his grip away. He stood his ground and told the man flat out that if he wanted to use the gun, he could. But we were not getting into that truck under any circumstances. His voice was shaking, but he didn't back down. I was right there beside him, terrified, but determined not to move. For a few seconds, it felt like time stopped. I genuinely thought we were about to be shot. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. The alley felt too narrow, too quiet. There was no one else around, no witnesses, no help. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the man snapped. He shouted, "Fuck this!" jumped back into his truck, slammed the door, and sped off down the alley, leaving us standing there shaking. The silence afterward was overwhelming. We just stood there, frozen, staring at each other in disbelief. I don't know how long we stood there, but it felt like forever. My hands were trembling. My mouth was dry. Neither of us could find the words to say anything meaningful. Eventually, we continued on to the taco cabana, like we had planned, but everything felt wrong. We sat there eating in complete silence. The food tasted like nothing. The noise of the restaurant felt distant and unreal. We didn't talk about what had happened. Not then. Not later that day. Not even in the weeks afterward. It was like acknowledging it out loud would make it more real, more terrifying. We never told our parents. We never called the police. Looking back now, I know that was a mistake. A big one. That man could have done the same thing to someone else, or worse. But at 18, all we wanted was to forget it ever happened. Even now, years later, I still feel the effects of that day. I'm more cautious. I don't trust strangers easily. I pay attention to my surroundings in a way I never did before. And every time I think about how close we came to getting into that truck, my stomach tightens. Because I don't believe for a second that he was calling the police. And I don't like to think about where that truck might have taken us if we had listened. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.